All right, this is Marty Wilson speaking. It's June 24th, 2022. I'm sitting in the Monroe County Historical Association with Mr. Dan Crawford, who's intimately connected with Pinebrook, and his father, Percy Crawford, a person of note in the Poconos. Amy's sitting here with me, and Tanya's sitting here with me. So Dan, let's start with where and when you were born.
Okay. I was born in 1941, long time ago, and in Philadelphia, and at the Hahnemann Hospital, and that was October, so my parents would have been doing their evangelism. My father was an evangelist, and my mother was the musician for his all of his enterprises. He was an entrepreneurial person, and she was, in my mind, she was as famous and important as he was because she did a lot of creative musical work for his ministry. In fact, I think she had her own ministry really without calling it that, or in her own mind, without separating it from his. Because in her mind, she was his, all that she did was supporting his mission and his ministry.
Did they meet doing mission work?
Yes, they met when she was only 15, and they were married when she was 17. He was a little bit older. He was close to 30 when they married. He was doing evangelism in Philadelphia. He had gotten his seminary degree. He was ordained as a Presbyterian minister, but he was not really in the church. He was only officially a Presbyterian, and he worked pretty much on his own as an evangelist, independently. So they met when he was having street meetings. They called them open-air meetings in Philadelphia, where he would preach, and he would try to save souls from all the people who just, all kinds of people who just wandered past Washington Square where he was. And so he had music for his services, and he needed a pianist, and he found my mother, and that's how it got started.
No kidding. So, of course, we're here to talk about the Poconos. What's the connection now? How does your family from Philadelphia come to the Poconos?
Okay, so his ministry, he had a radio ministry. No church, never was a pastor of a church, but he had a radio program called the Young People's Church of the Air, which started in 1931, and saved a lot of souls on that radio program. It was broadcasted in Philadelphia and New York City for a long time, and then he expanded it over the Northeast, and then gradually into the Midwest, and gradually it became a national program on 450 stations around the country. And my mother provided all the music on this half-hour program, and it was good music. She had a quartet, she had a brass ensemble, she had soloists, she had a men's chorus, and it was good quality music. She was a pianist, arranger, and producer of musical programs.
And so
you
had a radio show.
Okay. So after 2 years, my father realized that these souls that he was winning for Christ needed to congregate somewhere. I mean, they were out there listening to his radio program once a week, but they were asking him questions. What do we do now? How do we live the Christian life, and so on. So he thought he needed a place for them to congregate, and he thought of a Bible conference. Many of them in that era. And so 2 years after they started together, he found a property up here. That's an interesting story in itself. And started Pinebrook Bible Conference for 9 weeks. Opened from July 1st to Labor Day in 1933. He bought what had been an inn that had a couple of really, really nice buildings on it. A tennis court, they swam in Broadheads Creek. And he said, this is perfect for what I need. And it was. into a fabulous Bible conference every summer for 27 years before he died.
This is during the Depression,
Yes. Yes, he charged $11 a week for room and board, and then 12 the second year, and then it stayed that way all through the 30s and 40s. Eventually, it went up to 15, and I think when I was a teenager, it was something like $20 a week. Imagine that, all your meals and 100.
So you were born 41, if I remember correctly. So by then, he already had this thing up and running. So then you started you would come up with him every summer?
Sure, he'd bring the family up. We had 5 children in the family. We'd all work at the camp and participate in the music program, and we were in it, we were full on in it.
Are all your siblings musicians? And are you a musician?
I sing, an amateur. We all have some of that artistic element that my mother gave us. One brother's an artist, and another brother's a graphic artist. My sister's an interior decorator, and my brother is the only one who kind of took up the mantle of my father. He's got a ministry of his own through radio stations, Christian radio stations. I went into academia. I went to a very good college in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia area, Haverford, Quaker school, and then went on to get my PhD and teach.
What do you have your PhD in?
I went from Haverford to Princeton in their religion department for 3 years, and then I saw the light and switched into philosophy. And I moved from Princeton to Pittsburgh, got my PhD in philosophy at Pitt.
Well, tell us what you remember about the camp in the summer. Is it?
Well, a lot. It was a really it had it made a deep impression on anybody who was there. Most of the campers came in for a week. And there was Bible teaching, there was an invitation to accept Christ on the first day, which my father gave. Campfire at the end, in which people would dedicate their lives to Christian service. A lot of good music, congregation singing. People from Stroudsburg would come out for the music as much as anything, but he had some great speakers. Billy Graham was there before he was famous and after he was famous, 3 or 4 times. Cliff Barrows, Beverly Shea, who sang with Billy Graham in all his campaigns. He actually dedicated his life to, not dedicated, but he made the decision to go into full-time Christian work, which ended up being singing with Billy Graham. He made that decision at Pinebrook. So a lot of really important Protestant, evangelical, fundamentalist preachers and Bible teachers and musicians came through Pinebrook.
How many people would be there?
As many as 250, 300 every week.
And
new people coming in every week.
There was enough housing for that many people?
He built a lot of additional housing. After the flood in '55, he built two new motels, just long buildings with very nice accommodations at that time.
Where were these people from? Just the East Coast, or were they from all over the country?
They were the people he was reaching with his radio broadcast all year, all winter, all year. In fact, he was on the radio. He broadcasted from Pinebrook, actually, his weekly show, and a morning broadcast, a devotional program in the morning from 8 to 8:30. That was on WVPO. Is that the station here? A lot of people tell me they listened to that faithfully. And that was all through the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, as I said, I remember this name, and I think it has something to do with that radio show, my aunt and uncle.
I'll bet.
Yeah. So let's talk about the '55 flood. Now, if I remember correctly, and forgive me if my geography's wrong, but Pinebrook is you're going out not 7th Street, I guess.
9th. Like right here. Oh, I'm sorry, Fifth Street, yeah, I'm sorry.
It's just before the bridge. And so there was a camp down there that was wiped out during the flood. Was that connected?
The Davis camp.
Was that connected to the Pinebrook?
No, that was completely separate. But that was across one bridge. That was on the other side of Broadhead Creek. We were on this side. And I was just reading about it in my book. There were about 50-some people, I think, there in the camp. 3 of them came across the bridge and came across to Pinebrook that night to come to our evening service. And they were saved because of that. 27 people, I may be misremembering, were killed, died in that flood. I remember it vividly. Yeah, I was a kid, let's see, 55, I was 14.
So you were there that night?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I can remember people screaming who were out, hanging from trees, and we had one farmhouse on that side of the road too, right next to Davis Camp, and that was swept away. Fortunately, our quartet members got their stuff out of there just in time, and we're safe. We didn't lose anybody. But Percy was recovering from a heart attack. He had about 6 of them before he died. And he was still recovering. It was only 3 days before that. But this just woke him up. I mean, he took charge. He got his megaphone and he was out there driving around, shepherding people to safety and giving orders, and sort of like Fred Waring up at Shawnee did. There's a lot of similarity in the way they operated in that flood. And then the next morning, he sent food to people from the camp who were on the other side. So he really, that was his role. He was really the director, and he did that very well that night. Do you have a glass of water?
I do, yes.
Great. Yeah, I can't tell you too much more about that, but he took advantage of the fact that we lost a few cabins in that, and we lost no, we didn't lose the tabernacle, but it was completely flooded.
So the water was up that high?
Oh yeah, definitely. And so he had a campaign to raise funds to build 2 new buildings, and so the result was that he raised enough money to build a couple nice motels. They're still there as you drive on 191, that long building. He built that in 55.
So he died in 1960. You were only, 19 years old?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How big an influence he was a national figure, right?
Mm-hmm.
How big an influence did he have on your life?
Oh, tremendous. He also started a college, Christian college in Delaware, and he wanted his 4 sons to take over his work, his ministry, and he really worked toward that end. He wanted one of us to do one thing, and wanted my older brother Dick to take over the camps. Don would take over the radio broadcasting. I would, 19 years old, would become president of King's College. Dean kind of got left out of the picture. Some of that worked out. Dick did take over the camps for, as I said, 8 years. But I was the one who kind of strayed from the fold. And I wouldn't say that I lost my faith. That's always been a struggle ever since. But I definitely left the fundamentalist camp. But I did attend King's College for 2 years while he was living, and then the year he died, I transferred to Haverford College because I wanted more of a challenge.
Now at this point, that's the family home is in Philly somewhere. You just come up here for the summers.
That's right.
So after your dad died, and your brother ran the camp for 8 more years, did you continue to come up for those 8 years, or were you?
Not a couple of them. I worked with him for the first 1 or 2 years, And then I kind of dropped out of the picture at the camp. He ran it by himself.
So then after that point in your life, you're essentially in Philadelphia or following your academic career.
That's right, yeah. I would come and visit my mother. So let me pick up on her end of it. When he died, of course, she continued to do the music for my brothers operating the camp. And she was only 40, let's see, born in 1916. She was 45, so she was still in her prime, really. Had a lot to offer. I didn't say that Percy also, by 1938, 7 years after he started Pinebrook, he opened up 2 camps for kids, boys and girls, Shadow Brook and Mountain Brook, which were 1 mile south on 191. It's that neo-colonial mansion on the left, still there. And so for all those years, there was a boys' camp for boys 6 to 14 and girls 6 to 14. So my mother remarried, and she worked it out with my brother that they would live, she and her husband would live in that mansion there down on Mountain Brook's campus. And they lived there for only a year or 2, and my brother sold the whole property right out from under them after they completely renovated that house. And then they worked out another deal to buy a few acres where we live now, up above the camp, right above Pinebrook. And my stepfather renovated a barn, rebuilt a barn into a home, beautiful home. So my mother and he lived there for over 20 years. And then we inherited it from her when she and he died. So there's a continuous thread there.
And then after she died, you moved into that house? Or?
Yes, I purchased it from the estate.
Gotcha.
And essentially it was my inheritance.
Yeah.
That property. It was 50 acres. And my father had bought it way back in the 30s, so this is another tie. He bought the land around him, including this farm, so that he could raise cattle, so that he could serve steak and roast beef to his campers.
Really?
Yeah, and so he raised cattle there. We still have barbed wire
Okay.
here and there around the property.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was all into sort of healthy food and clean outdoor living and recreation, and that was a big part of his appeal to young people.
Now you brought a book with you, Dan, which you wrote. Did you? And you just wrote this book. When did you write it?
In 2010.
2010.
Yeah, it took me 8 years to write this book.
Why do you think it took so long? Any particular reason?
Yeah, I was a philosopher, and that's not the kind of style that you need for a biography, and so I had to sort of change my approach. I had to do a lot of research. Historical work. My wife's a linguist and a historian, so she helped me a lot. Yeah, it just took a long time to get all this stuff together. There's a lot of it, but we were the only ones who had it. I mean, he was being forgotten too fast, and you can well imagine when this happened. You know, died in 1960. It's now 2040 years. Even though he was pretty famous, he was being forgotten. So I wanted to secure his place in history. That was my goal.
Yeah, great. Well, I look forward to reading this.
Yeah, I'm proud of it. It did sell out, the paperback. There are still hardbound editions available. Yeah, it's a university press, so it's peer reviewed.
And you said earlier it took you 50 years to get around to writing it. Was that because of your career? You were just too busy, or did you have to let something process in your brain?
Yes, I had to. I just had to reassess, you know, where I stood religiously. I mean, I knew I didn't agree with much of his theology, but I also didn't want to throw out the whole package. And so it was kind of a struggle religiously for me all those years. My family thought I was an atheist, you know, a devout atheist, but I wasn't so sure of that. And I just finally felt like I could think objectively and dispassionately about him and what he had done. And I really did want to, I thought he had done something very good for the people who followed him. And I wanted to write about it.
What do you think his greatest achievement was?
Ooh. I think it was his radio and television broadcast. I didn't tell you, but after, in 1949, that's after 18 years on the radio of that program, the Young People's Church of the Air, with all that wonderful music, he was ready to move to television. And my mother had a program that could be just, it was just perfect for a television audience. And so he signed a contract with the ABC network for a coast-to-coast program, the first religious program on the national program called Youth on the March, and he just transferred her whole ensemble to television. And he was very effective. This is a picture of him from the pulpit in front of the television camera. So for 49 to 53, he had a national coast-to-coast television program, and then he took a world tour with his team for a year. Then he came back and he continued television sporadically, but mainly in the East Coast, Philadelphia and New York City, until 1958. Then he bought a television station. He wanted to start a Christian network, and so in the last 8-9 years of his life, he was buying, purchasing, and acquiring radio stations and one television station in Philadelphia, which right now is Channel 17. Then it was a UHF station. Maybe it still is, but it's, my oldest brother ran that for a number of years after he died, and then finally had to sell it.
He was a bit of a mogul. He was a bit of a...
Yes. Yeah. He was entrepreneurial, very much so.
Yeah.
So he was just counting the days until he would have his own television program on his own television station. He wouldn't have to pay these huge fees for his half hour of television.
He died at 58 years old.
Yeah.
Do you think he had, I mean, I don't know that anybody ever really knows, right? But unless you have cancer or something, do you think, you said he had some heart issues. Do you think he
Yes.
that he was in bad health there?
He had what's it called as a child, it weakened your heart. He knew he had a weak heart. So, and as I say, he did have a few episodes. He would always bounce back within a week or two, get right back to work.
And that is what ultimately...
Yeah, that killed him. Yeah, he was on his way to a meeting in Lancaster, a Youth for Christ meeting in Lancaster. He had the heart attack on the turnpike in Lancaster.
Was he driving at the time?
Yes.
Was there anybody in the car with him?
Yes, my mother, my younger sister. He had stopped the car to, he'd left an overcoat in Howard Johnson's previously on the way back. So he stopped the car and walked across the turnpike, not too smart, and he had the heart attack there in Howard Johnson's.
Okay.
Yeah. And he lived for about 2 days after that.
Well, you grew up, you had an interesting life living with this gentleman, and your own life too, of course. But.
Yes, and I feel very fortunate for that, and my mother too. Yeah. Yeah, I feel very lucky to have had it. And they were, of course, it wasn't the greatest family life or way to be brought up, being put on television and going to all these meetings a couple times every week.
Why, because they were never around, or what do you mean?
They were going to meetings 4 or 5 nights a week. They were never around. And we were taken with them because we sang. We had a little quartet of my four brothers. So we went with them very often to sing, on the television program, radio program. So that's tough. But I think all in all, it was a good childhood. I I don't, I don't have strong. My brothers have very negative feelings toward him, very negative, or I should say ambivalent. I mean, it's love hate.
Yeah.
But they have rebelled much more than I. But they are both back in the fold, and I'm not. So it's funny how these things work.
Yeah. Wow. And did you say your mother still alive or not?
No, but she lived for, let's see, she died in 86, so 26 more years.
And what was her name? I don't think you said her name.
Ruth Crawford.
What was her maiden name?
Duvall.
Are there still recordings, videotapes
Oh,
of these?
yes. I'm writing about my mother now. I've sort of turned my attention to her, and I've spent a number of years putting together a paper. It's not long enough to be a book, and I did shorten it and try to get it published. I'm still working on publication right now, somewhere. But yes, there's tons of material. They have recordings going all the way back to 1944.
Is it on YouTube or someplace that's easily accessible?
Yes, it's on my website. You can hear their broadcast, the Young People's Church of the Air broadcast from, I have about 50 programs, radio programs, from 1944 to 47.
Wow.
That's 70 years ago. And it's beautiful music. It's still very clear.
And if somebody wanted to see these, they would go where?
To my website, dandcrawford.com.
dandcrawford.com.
And then there's for those programs, they are on my other website, percycrawford.com. Percy Crawford, it's that simple. And I have his sermons. I have about 50 sermons, and I have his radio broadcasts, about 50 of them. They were made on big 15-inch discs and sent around to radio stations to play on, all of these stations around the country.
Where do you think your dad got this talent? Were his parents so inclined?
No, they weren't. Well, this was he was born in 1902, so this is after World War I. He went to Bible school in 1926, just before the Depression. People were hungry for religion. They were, after the war, there was a lot of discontent, searching, for happiness, for a good life. And this was a time when fundamentalism thrived. He didn't have much trouble getting a popular audience. And radio was a new form of communication. The evangelists before him, Billy Sunday would have been the most prominent one. I mean, they were reaching, over a lifetime, they might reach, a couple million people. Percy could reach 1 million people in 1 week on the radio. So it was a new era, for evangelical religion. It was thriving and it was popular at that time.
So he came along at just the right time.
Yeah.
Was he Philadelphia born and raised, or was he?
No, he was Canadian. Born in Manitoba, then grew up in Vancouver, and came down, kind of ran away from home, basically, because his father had divorced and left the home. He came down into Washington and down to California. He wanted to go to UCLA. That was his goal, and I think he was admitted, actually, but he got sidetracked, and when he got there, he went to the Church of the Open Door in Los Angeles, and he was converted before he even got to school. So he enrolled at the Bible school, Biola, it's called, Bible Institute of Los Angeles. It's still there. It's come a long way. I mean, it's a big, it's a mammoth school right now.
So how did he end up in Philly? And then eventually, well, the Poconos, because I guess it's beautiful and it's near Philly, but How do you-
Yes, that's a good question. As a student at Biola, and he did go over to UCLA and enrolled at UCLA after he finished the Bible Institute. He finished in, it's a 2-year program, or, yeah, 2-year program. He had to wait a year to get in, so he spent 3 years in Los Angeles. And then after that, he enrolled in UCLA because he wanted to get an education now. He realized how important that was. And so he went there for over a year, but then finally dropped out. He didn't want to go to a secular university because of the atheism, which was rampant. And then he went to Wheaton College in Chicago. But in the interim, he had a quartet, which he assembled from the Bible Institute, and took them across the country doing evangelism. He would preach.
A quartet? You mean, are we talking music?
Singers, yeah. You
So
had
your
to have
dad was
some
also a performer. I mean,
No, he built a quartet. He made a quartet out of his fellow students at the Bible Institute. That's very common. They all had their quartets because they all had evangelistic, what we would now call outreach, and so he got this quartet together, and in the summer he took a cross-country tour in 1927, all the way back out to the East Coast, Philadelphia, Boston. That's where he started to make contacts. And then when he went to Wheaton College in Chicago, another tour along the East Coast, so he gradually got enough contacts to start somewhere. And he went to Philadelphia to go to seminary after college, went to Westminster Seminary, which was Presbyterian. So that's what took him to Philadelphia.
okay. I was wondering, what it would have been like to have a father like that. I mean, I'm wondering as a boy what it might have been like to have somebody who is so devoted to religion. I mean, I don't know what the right word would be, but, and he's famous. He's not just, a farmer in the west end of Monroe County or something who's really religious. This guy is famous. When you went to your friends' houses, did you go to your friends' houses? Were things different than in your house? The way the kids were raised?
No, he wanted us to be, as we put it, be in the world but not of it. And that meant that you should go to a secular school, which we did. We went to private schools, and be, part of it, engage in sports, have a lot of friends, but you have to live the Christian life. They called it the separated life. That meant you don't swear, you don't smoke, you don't dance, you don't go to movies, which we didn't. So my first movie I saw, I was 19 years old.
Okay.
So that was a big part of it. We lived a separated life, but we were young people. We kind of rebelled. My older brothers, they were bad boys. They got into trouble. I was a good boy. I was a goody-goody. So yeah, we had a lot of friends and lived a pretty normal life.
All right. Well, you've had a fascinating life and an inspirational father. I mean, I know you said, I don't know how you put it, you kind of strayed a little bit from the fold, but it must have been life-shaping for you to have this gentleman as your father.
It certainly was, because he was so dynamic, but he was a dictator.
He was a dictator?
Yeah, he ran everything himself. He made all the decisions. Unlike Billy Graham set up a whole hierarchy of team members in his evangelism. So he spread out the authority. Percy kept it all to himself. There was Percy and everybody else underneath him, which created a problem because when he died, there was no one who could step in and do it.
Where'd your mother fit into that hierarchy?
She was part of his team, which the team was she and her quartet, 5 people basically. He would take them with him at all his meetings. There would always be music before he would preach. So she was half the ministry, at least. But she was fully, everything she did was, and all the team members thought the same way, this is what I'm writing about now, was thought of as subsidiary, as contributing to his goal of saving souls. And her job through her music was to put people in the right mood for him, the evangelist, to come along and bring them to a crisis state where they would make a decision for Christ. He would tell them, look, right now is your chance. You're either going to heaven or hell. And unless you accept Christ, you're going to hell. And so her job was, through her music, wonderful music, was just to loosen people up, make them, soften them up, get them ready for this big crisis moment that was coming. So it was all contributing to him.
This is early days of television when your dad's doing this.
That's right. There are no other televangelists at that point. He was the first.
So he was groundbreaking in that regard. What was a show typically, what was it like? I mean, how long was a show then?
Half hour. He had to bring his own crew. ABC didn't have hardly, all they supplied was the camera and 2 people in the booth. The cameraman and 2 people in the booth. He had to have his own floor manager. He had to construct all his sets, props, bring all his musicians in and write the script. My mother would help. She provided all the music.
So can you walk us through a show? I mean, would it open up on your mother playing music and then your dad would come out and preach, or how?
That's chapter 7, if you want.
I'm looking forward to reading it.
There were about 50 musicians, and so 25 in the orchestra and 25 singers. And that included our 4 siblings. We were part of it too. We were called the Junior Quartet.
So you're on TV, huh?
Oh yeah, for all those 4 years and more. So it would open up. We would all be standing in a row, and the camera would come down right through all of us, and end up at the orchestra. My mother was at the piano, and they'd have their opening song, "On to Victory," sing the same song every week. Then it would start with music. Percy would welcome everybody. Then it would start with music. My mother would have, the quartet would have an opening number. It was usually a lively, kind of a spiritual. Again, this is just to keep the audience from turning to another channel. Then the theme would be developed. My mother always had a theme for every program. Ship, cross, harvest, Thanksgiving, of course, and 75 different themes. She would construct music around these themes. So there would be soloists, quartet, the orchestra would play something. Sometimes there would be a guest musician. The men's chorus would sing. She would do all the arranging of this music. Then my father would come in and he'd read from the mailbag, letters that people sent in saying, "Oh, I found Christ last week on your program, and it's so wonderful." Read letters from all over the country. Then he'd have a testimony from someone, some athlete or some other evangelist, or various people would come in for testimonies. Then he'd make his announcements, advertise the camp, advertise his college. Sometimes, I'm just going to say interview, but that would be with the person who gave the testimony. Then, so we're about 20 minutes into the program now. Then he'd come back to the quartet, and now they would sing a different kind of song. It would be more of a meditative, a slower, kind of a hymn-like piece. Again, this is just to get people in the right mood. And then for 8 minutes, he would preach his sermon. And this this is how he would preach. He'd right in your face. Really engage the individual. Really good at it. And scare them too. Always something about hell toward the end of the sermon. But then also interestingly, after he would scare them, there would be there was a tenderness in his sermons. He would come back and say, Jesus loved you so much that he died for you. And he'd bring that out, how he went up broken and bruised and battered. He walked the hill of Calvary to die for you. And that really worked. People just really responded to his message. He was very good at giving invitations, we called them. You know, if it was in a church, it was called an altar call, where you would come up. A sawdust trail, you know, you've heard of that. He was good at the invitation. It was a specialty. And so then the quartet would sing the final song. They'd sing, just as Billy Graham did, they'd sing, you know, very slow, "It was for you, the Savior died. Into my heart, Lord Jesus, come into my heart." And that would be, you know, he'd ask the people to kneel by their radio and give their hearts to Christ.
And just to be clear, your mom didn't write all that music, or she did write all that?
No, she didn't. She worked with leading composers. She put together 13 songbooks of choruses and sort of gospel music. And so she got thousands of people who would send in their music, and she would go through it all, you know, play it, see if it was appropriate for the young people at the camps and so on, and then make these songbooks. So when we got to camp, there'd be a new songbook to give out to all the campers. You know, they'd sing from those songbooks for the whole week.
Now you mentioned the college. Did you talk about that earlier? If you did,
He started a college in 1938. It's called the King's College. He went to Wheaton, and his dream was to have a Wheaton of the East, because Wheaton was really a good school. It was never well funded. He got some beautiful properties in Delaware, and then he moved from Delaware to he started out in New Jersey actually for 3 years, but then he couldn't get accreditation. He couldn't give a degree in New Jersey, so he moved to Delaware for about all through the 40s. And then in the mid-50s, he moved to Briarcliff Manor, New York, Westchester County. And that's where I went to school. He was president of the college. He was president, but he only went there once a week. I mean, he was president. He was a sort of an absentee president. He'd come in and just make a big fuss, and just make trouble, really. But teach his course, and he taught 2 courses. He taught one called Personal Evangelism and the Gospel of John. I took both of them. Every freshman had to take those 2 courses from him, one semester and then second semester. So he was president of Briarcliff for 5 years, beautiful property. But it was an old hotel that was gradually, falling apart, and they just couldn't maintain it properly. So then he died in 1960, and again, nobody to take over. That he had gotten ready to step in. So the board did find, a couple of good people to take the college, and it's still going.
It's still going.
It's located in New York City, in the Empire State Building.
How about that?
It's called the King's College. I don't have anything to do with it because I don't like the whole emphasis of the college. Their whole emphasis is on leadership, getting their students into leadership positions. That means into government. And I don't like it when fundamentalists, evangelicals, move into government circles. So I don't have much to do with it.
How about that? Now, does this produce a bachelor's degree? Do they get it?
Oh yeah, it's accredited.
Wow.
Accredited college. And I have to admit, they've got some pretty good faculty. I've been impressed with the materials they've been sending me.
Huh.
Yeah, they're publishing interesting things. But it's strong evangelicalism, you know, and I've got some problems with it. But I don't condemn it.
All right. Yeah, it's probably not something we should delve into in this interview.
No.
But I would love to talk to you about that sometime.
Yeah, I would too.
But let me ask you this. Now, I think we've covered, is there something that we didn't cover? Is there some questions that we should have asked?
Relating to Pinebrook?
I have a couple questions, so
Yeah.
I stepped out for a few minutes, so it was already answered. So you said that the camp was open July 1st, the Labor Day.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it there the rest of the year? Was it just vacant?
Yes.
Okay.
For most of the time my father lived. In the last couple of years he started winter conferences. But that was hard. That meant retrofitting, you know, his buildings, and he didn't really try to do that. So that wasn't successful. But my brother got that idea when he took over for those 8 years, and he really pushed winter conferences, and it actually got to be pretty successful for a while.
I'm guessing there was a whole staff, cooks and lawn care and
Yeah.
all of that, right? I mean, did you, I'm sure you said you worked there, did you do that sort of thing?
No,
Or
I was
were you
in
more the,
I was in college,
oh, okay.
so I
I
wasn't
mean,
part of.
growing up, when you would go
Oh,
to the
growing
summer,
up, oh yeah, sure. I had all those jobs.
washing dishes and.
Everything, yeah. But, so winter conferences became pretty big during my brother's tenure there. But otherwise, yes, we just sit there all winter.
Interesting.
Yeah. Different time, right?
Right.
Couldn't economically make that work.
Yes.
Yeah. It was
right.
low budget, it was a really low budget. And the Mennonite people who have it right now have done wonders for that camp. They moved in there three years ago, I think. They bought it. They bought it from Bible Fellowship Church, which had bought it from my brother. And they have renovated everything. It's fabulous right
And it's
now.
still called Pinebrook?
Yeah, it's called Pinebrook. I love going down there because it really fulfilled his dream. And they're doing wonderful things for Stroudsburg, for the community. They have a daycare center that's affordable. And their mission is to reach out to local people and bring them into this environment and meet their social need. It's social justice. The Mennonites are really, really very good. Great.
Do you have any other questions?
I think that's it.
Is there anything we didn't touch on that you think we should have talked about?
No, I'm just thinking, well, I just wanted to make it clear that there's continuity here through my mother, who stayed on the property after it was sold. Remember I said that my brother sort of pulled the rug out from under her? Well, she bought about 40 acres from him, and then she purchased it, so he couldn't do that again. And that's right above Pinebrook, and that's where we live now. So there is a continuous Crawford family here, right through to the present day. And here's what I want to tell you. What I have right now is a concert series. This is the way my mother's music has sort of come down to me. 15 years ago, I was still teaching at Nebraska. I was teaching here at several colleges in Pennsylvania. My wife and I got jobs at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln 21 years ago, 24 years ago. And so we said, well, let's go to Nebraska. We'll go out there for 6 years and we'll see if we like it. Well, we stayed for 21 years. And, but we came back here in the summer because by that time we had purchased this property. So we lived here in the summer, and then Christmas and Thanksgiving, often we'd come back. So 15 years ago, when I was still teaching out there, I started a summer concert series on our property. Rebuilt one of the structures into a music hall, and had 4 or 5 musical groups coming in, classical. got a lot of them from New York City, got a lot of them from Europe, where I would go to a festival every year. And it's top-notch music. It's just fabulous. You probably haven't heard of it because I don't advertise. It's all word of mouth. But I have a really good group of people. I've got 350 people on my email list. And I can usually fill that music hall. It holds about 85 to 90 people. Since COVID, it's been somewhat hard to recover. My 2 concerts I had there this summer, I had only 60. But they're devoted, they love the music.
And how does one find out about it, or does one have to be invited, or?
One has to get on my email list. That's probably, I'd love for all of you to come, because it's...
You know, we can find your email address at your website, or?
I have 2. I'm still using my University of Nebraska website. Email address. But I also have Dan D. Crawford at Gmail.
Dan D. Crawford at
D,
Gmail.
my middle name, Duvall. Dan D. Crawford at Gmail.
Write it down.
Yeah.
I have heard of these concerts.
Beacon Hill concerts.
Yeah,
Have you?
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Uh-huh.
And I always say, I have to go to that, but how about that? Now I will.
Good. Great. Yeah,
Are you-
I've got Jim Maroney. He's a faithful attender.
Okay, right.
He was in the
Maybe
music.
that's where I heard about it. Maybe
ESU.
Yeah.
I advertise over there. I put flyers up at ESU. That's where you are, isn't it?
Well, I used to be. I just retired.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so you're keeping yourself busy. You've had a fascinating life.
Yeah, writing about my mother's been my last project, and now I want to get that published somewhere, and then get all that material together and get it preserved. It's a big job.
So it sounds like you will continue to be busy. I was going to say, what's your next project? But looks like you got quite a project.
Yeah, I'm not looking much beyond that, but
Okay.
I'll be busy.
All right. Well, then I think we'll end the interview.
Well, this has really been great.
Well, thanks very much.
Enjoyed this.
I'll turn this off.